Welcome back to Deep Thoughts, ladies and gentlemen. I almost had the mic problem. I got everything plugged in, but the little power clip on the side of the computer was screwed up. So this is going to be the final part of the, at least the summer 2020 of ancient building tech. I imagine if, new stuff comes out, and there's tons of stuff out there, especially with this Brien Foerster guy, I will be making other episodes. I don't know if I'll call it the same thing. Maybe I should. And that way it's all one big suite of episodes that you can just binge watch at a future time. Definitely just amazing revelations that I think that we're almost not prepared to process in our brains. The second portion, because I watched 2 hours of a 7-hour video. It's really 6 hours and 50 minutes. So there's 5 hours left. And the information is going to make up this last episode, which of this particular run of the episode, probably last one in season 5. So we're going to cram about 5 hours of stuff into this one, which should make it much more exciting and fast paced. But I really want to encourage you guys to think about what this really means as we go through this, because for those of you listening on podcasts, there's going to be, like the first part, lots of photographs from his presentations, a few that I'm going to find, just as I digress, I'll go grab other photos. I don't know if I'm going to digress in this one, but his photos are so well done that you really don't need to search on much else outside of his purview. So we're going to cover a few things. I just want to get out the places that he covers. We're going to cover Baalbeck, which is just outside of Beirut in Lebanon. We're going to go over to Mexico, where a lot of Inca, Aztec, Mayan things are built. And then we're going to go to Easter Island. And then we're going to come back to Egypt. Just as I suspected, he did gloss over the pyramids. He mentioned them a little bit in his first section, but he ends up coming back. Now, his video, if you watch it, which is again 6 hours, 55 minutes, somewhere in there are some editing flubs at the end. It's like he got tired of editing his own stuff. And trust me, I know all about that. So he missed a couple of his mistakes, but he does exactly what I do, which is he messes it up, he pauses, and then he redoes it. He just forgot to cut a few of them out. Then there's a few glitches where he ends up repeating. As soon as he gets to Mexico, he ends up repeating about a 10-minute clip twice. And so you end up hearing the same things over and over again. Probably not bad for muscle memory. But again, as we go into this, I want you to open your mind first so that you take this in. Last one was sort of a, hey, let's come over here and then we'll all explore this together. But now that we know about Brien Foerster's approach, the really amazing part of his approach is that he is looking at ancient builders from, in his estimation, 12,000 years ago, which is around 10,000 BC. Again, there's a lot of people out there that take it back a lot further than that. He's not opposed to it, but he has a whole theory about the galaxy as a whole. And because he's mainly an archaeologist, and I don't know how much he has with cosmology, I think he's very mystified by folks that took shots in the mid-1950s and then people who built books on that. And he's definitely selling some books. So we're going to give you his theories at the end of this episode about what he thinks might have reset mankind. Something obviously did. But we have a civilization on Earth a long time ago. They had achieved a bizarre mix of technology. They seemed to lack any expression of art. It was always form, function, and shape. Now, that doesn't mean they didn't create a few statues here and there that could be dated way back, because they have statues in Egypt that are made of 1,200-ton rocks put together. They have Colossus statues that have been blown apart that, any one piece you could barely move, and it used to be all together and massive. We have a culture that, evolved sort of, like we know our group of humanity grew, which is to discover engineering, which means you have to discover mathematics first. And then you must have the ingenuity of the Homo sapiens sapien to build tools to solve problems that you can conceive, right? How do you build a borehole drill if you don't perceive the fact that you need a borehole in the first place? What do you do to evolve to that point? Well, you bore by hand, maybe, some chisels or some sticks inside mud, and you start to figure out you can, control water, control sunlight, maybe create a little optic to catch a star in a particular hole in your home. Probably all mistake to begin with, an all serendipitous moment that then starts to gain a strategic approach as time moves on, as wise people come and go. And it's odd that they would have achieved such a massive amount of technology. We're talking about Pythagoras' theorem, pi, every single thing the Greeks rediscovered, they had already discovered. Everything. They had figured out ways of moving rocks, and it just blows the mind. Imagine having the technology to create something that we've only invented in the last couple hundred years, which is a circular bore saw with diamond-crusted tips. You get to that point, but you haven't figured out a VCR. You haven't figured out a car. You haven't figured out combustion engines. Wow. The consciousness of man maybe was a lot more sound, or maybe it wasn't technically man. Or maybe it is man, but we are technically something that we don't even understand. And perhaps these structures were simply built very simple, very devoid of art, which then calls back to another culture. Maybe calls back to another planet to keep everything clean. We're just going to provide you with utility to exist. You won't know because you're primitive versions of them, meaning us, our ancestors. You would walk around and just like waking up in a dream. It's just there. Did you wake up as a child and when you were born and then walk outside and go, Mom, what are these cars doing? What are these things? What's that thing in the sky? What? No, you just accept it. Later, art was added. Well, a sophisticated society usually always incurs art. Art is a huge part of all things. Storytelling is a huge part of any sophisticated culture. My writing teacher, I think, has made the point that he learned from others that any creature with a consciousness, a true sentient consciousness, I think, therefore I am, Descartes kind of things, needs stories to role play in the mind what a human being may or may not become. So we have evidence of inventions that blow the frickin' mind. And then we have sort of a bizarre absence of things that we find important. Imagine thinking that, and I'm going to give you a little tidbit from the end here. The Bible goes back about 4500 BC, and that's where a lot of scientists get all angry with biblical people. And, it's just when that book started being written. And so if you just want to negate everything that happened before it, that's your choice. Doesn't bother me whatsoever. But perhaps the previous culture evolved for tens of thousands of years and got to a point where they didn't like art. What about all the, cave paintings in France? What about all the Peruvian desert stuff? I mean, some of these paintings have been dated, it's all probably BS about when these things actually occurred, but they've been pushed back tens of thousands of years. And there's going to be a theory that I'm going to drop later on about why they think we might have been truly cavemen. And their theory has to do with we weren't cavemen, and then we were cavemen, and then now we're no longer anymore. But could you imagine us getting to a point where we no longer needed art? Perhaps it is that, like there's a Star Trek episode for Voyager where they stop by this planet and they're trying to get back home to Earth. For those of you who don't know the series, they're about 80 years from Earth due to an accident at the beginning of the first show in the first season. Now they're hauling ass back. But they bump into a world that trades stories as the highest commodity in the world. They trade art because they have been around for so long. They've heard all their stories and they want new stories. I don't know. Sounds strange. And then to go into this obsessive art after this non-art phase, it's weird. To go into, I don't know, the more delicate, ornate creation of things when before we could move 800-ton stones. Dozens and dozens of them. This Baalbeck place, it's Baalbeck. It is about 100 acres. It's huge. And what's nice about it is a lot of the surrounding areas are privately owned, so anyone who wants to come and research can hang out, and there's not a guard, saying, don't look at that, don't look at this, which you'll experience in great quantity in Egypt, and you'll experience it just a little bit in South America. There's a gigantic stone that is actually frozen in time that is a 1,000-ton stone, and it's still connected to the ground. And I believe there's some damage on one side that they believe that may be responsible for it being abandoned. But all of these giant structures that are abandoned cause the archaeologists to lean back on this idea that there was something that reset the time for man. And Brien Foerster is 100,000%, 12,000 BC, 1,000 years ago, 10,000 BC, which we'll get to his old theory at the end here. So Baalbeck is a region, obviously, Lebanon sort of area outside of Beirut that was heavily contested, right? It's a marine-based landmass, so, trade routes. It's just easy to live on the coast because you've got the benefit of inland vegetation and animals, plus you've got fishing, trade routes, so you have a commerce that goes there. So it was fought over for literally at least 1,000 years. And so it suffered all kinds of damage. But the Romans oddly engaged in some of their biggest construction in that area that they didn't do anywhere near Rome. Columns that are taller than any other columns they ever constructed. And it may have been strictly because they were super duper influenced by the megalithic structures that they discovered. The gigantic foundational stones. Now, the stones aren't, there's two main types of stones. And one of them is right there. It's part of the local region. It's kind of a limestone-y thing. And again, this is all like 7 out of a system of 1 to 10. It's a 7. So you have to use very, very hard materials to etch it, to break it. And we're talking about an era where in the pre-Roman construction, we're looking at most likely 8,000 years before the Bronze Age. Bronze, of course, being very, very light in its ability, very soft. But then you have these sort of red granite pillars. And what's interesting about them is they stick out like a sore thumb because there's nothing like it. So the limestone ones that are 800 tons a piece, I mean, there's just dozens and dozens of these things creating the foundation of both the mesa, of the plaza floor, but it's also the foundation of these buildings. There's no sign of these things being dragged around. The land is covered with lots of vegetation. It's very hilly. So if they were going to excavate, some pathway into this local area, it should be very evident. Trees, the old theory of rolling rocks on, telephone poles, doesn't work out with a 1,000-ton rock, an 800-ton rock. It doesn't work. It would totally and utterly obliterate the tree. But then to even do that, you're going to have to do it on a prepared surface. You can't be going uphill, downhill, uphill, downhill. You're going to have to cut a straight path and hopefully a little bit downhill from where you're pulling this thing in the first place. And the land is just extremely hilly. But the red granite pillars are it's probably the closest thing that these individuals who built these big structures that then the Romans built on top of. And the Romans put a tremendous amount of effort into this area. So they built some gorgeous things on top, but you immediately can see the rocks that go on top of the big rocks. And this is his entire theme of a 7-hour video, as he shows you the rocks down below and the rocks up above. Rocks down below are mind-blowingly gigantic, no mortar, they're interlocked. In most cases, you can't put a human hair between these gigantic rocks. Of course, in Machu Picchu, you have a tremendous amount of interlocking rocks that just makes the brain blow up. It's crazy. But with the rocks above, you see that they were actually cut for something else. It's like they had a purpose, like it was a Machu Picchu type thing, maybe not as randomly cut, but they're just sort of stacking them up. And this is most likely due to the massive amount of contested ownership of the area, right? But the red granite in this area, the geologists from, the area and from here that will go over there, they said, look, this red granite, the closest quarry for it is in Aswan, Egypt, which is about 1,000 miles away. The granite pillars are anywhere from 15 to 20 feet tall. I think he undershot it by about 10 feet with some of these gigantic pillars. And maybe he was just referring to the slide he was looking at, but they're all one piece, like over in Petra, except these things are utterly gorgeous. I mean, they just, they're beveled at the bottom. They come up, they swell, then they taper off, and they have this beautiful ornate stuff on the top, all one piece. And it's extremely clear that these things were mounted and spun on a lathe. Absolutely uncontested. Perfect symmetry. Unlike the ones in Petra that have a lot of scratch marks on them, these are perfectly polished. And what he said was, he goes, look, we've had engineers come with us. And he says, he happened to have an engineer on this particular trip. It was his first trip to Baalbeck. And he said, look, this dude said, 200 years ago, we would cease to have the technology to create one of these pillars. But he goes, 2,000 years ago? No way. No way. Which is specifically referencing when the Romans got there and started doing what they were doing. There are hundreds and hundreds of these pillars that have fallen down. And what the Romans attempted to do, and I guess some of the local restoration by maybe archaeologists, is they took, some pieces and they kind of figured out, okay, I think maybe these fell together. And so they reassembled them. They used modern cement, modern techniques to put them back together. He found a few of these columns, which were about, I'd say, based on him being, let's say, 6 feet. He looks like he's pretty tall. I'd say he's a little bit over 6 feet. It's at least a 7-foot diameter on one of these pillars that had fallen over. And he was standing next to one that was fairly white. So it might have been a limestone one. He, at points, he was like, look, the red granite ones are 100% from a previous era, previous technology. But these white ones, maybe they were created by the Romans. But he has a right angle ruler with him. And he's just pushing it up against this thing. And he's like, you move it up and down. And he goes, there's not a single blemish on this thing other than the weathering. But he goes, you don't have any indentations. You don't have any reliefs out. He goes, this thing is as close to laser perfect as it could possibly be. And how can you do that without some sort of circular saw? Without some sort of advanced technology, which only today we have a chance of doing. Now, we also know that the Romans had a superior formula for concrete, and I think that even to this day, we don't quite have exactly what they had, where it was like a concrete that it was so pulverized and so amazing that it almost could be mistaken for a marble. So then he finishes with Baalbeck, and you really need to see his slideshow. I'm going to obviously be cutting in some of his slides here, and you definitely, I'll link it down below so you get a chance to see it. The repetitiveness, the consistency of his theories are sort of undeniable. You will have an area of Baalbeck that is, again, 100 acres, so it's phenomenal. You just need to see it. And it looks a little bit like Greece. It looks a little bit like the Parthenon here and there, but it's much more destroyed. But you'll have a wall that looks like it's very man-made, bunch of clunky blocks that aren't, fitted together properly. Someone just stacked them. And all of a sudden you have an 800-ton stone. Perfect. Just unbelievably smooth, perfectly mitered edges, 90-degree angles. And you're like, okay, there's no way in hell that whoever did the rest of this work did this one. Unless the guy fell on and hurt his head. But the amount of craftsmanship that the Romans added was probably some of the finer craftsmanship I've ever seen Roman architects. So if you ever went there, you would probably be observing at least 3 different cultures. You'd be seeing the unknown culture that we are still trying to figure out who they were, then the in-betweens, which don't have much in the way of art, and then you have the Romans showing up doing a lot of their classic structures. But fairly close by is a place called Byblos. And Byblos is a sort of a Roman marina fort that's there. Apparently Byblos means the book, which is why the Bible is called a Bible. It's a derivative of Byblos. At least, that's one of the theories. He's pretty cautious about some of that stuff. It could be somewhere with a play on words, but it makes sense to me. But now in this particular little thing, it's a pretty boring shot when you first see it, and you're just kind of like, okay, it looks pretty human. He's like, look, Byblos is interesting. He goes, pretty much all of it looks very, very man-made, extremely small blocks compared to the stuff over at Baalbeck. But then there are these, I would say about 10 inches, maybe 8 to 10 inch diameter red granite pillars that are inserted in the wall sideways, sort of like taking the place of a brick. And then it has mortar all around it. And it kind of looks strange. It's kind of like when you cut up hot dogs to make that little beans and frank thing. It looks kind of strange. But of course, it yearns back to Aswan. What's strange about the Byblos thing for me is that in Baalbeck, you have gigantic pillars that are just formidably gigantic. And then you have both in length and both in diameter. And then to have these really small ones, it's very strange. So it's something to look at. And there's definitely, here and there, these gigantic stones that they interlock and they don't have any mortar. And then on top of them, you see some shoddy work with mortar. It's really strange. But now we're going to go over to Mexico. And it's essentially most of the land north of Peru that he's talking about. But it's currently today what is recognized as Mexico, which goes all the way down to the end of the Gulf there, the Panama Canal, and that kind of stuff. This is where you get, again, more honesty, in my opinion, from the locals. Now, there's still some confusion down there, and of course, we're just trying to make the best assumptions. But what they have is obviously several different types of pyramids down there. And I think he's, I've now bounced into some of his other videos. He definitely needs to do more detail. But you have essentially a bunch of structures built out of basalt, which I guess is some volcanic rock, with some volcanic rock mixed in. I don't know if basalt's a volcanic rock or not. But you have names for these temples. And I forgot one of the names. One of the names was built 3 times. And it's sort of a lower, stair-stepped pyramid. You guys have seen these things, and I'll show you the pictures inside the video. But they were pretty upfront about the fact that, hey, we even named it after what we did. We found it, we built it, then we built it again. As each leader came in, they kept stacking rock more and more. But what's interesting about that, if you really were to role-play that in your brain as I said it, and you hadn't seen the photographs yet, you'd probably think, well, the foundation then, just like every other photograph this guy has, the foundation would be the big rocks, and then on top of that, you'd have little rocks and little rocks. And you're not completely wrong, except there's one exception with these temples/pyramids of Mexico. The stair steps, they go up the center, and you've seen these 100 times in movies, Indiana Jones type movies especially. Those seem to be gigantic rocks with a lot of precision. Along the way, up the staircase, you have 2 to 3 ton stones, sort of ornating every plateau that they end up creating. It's very interesting. There are rumors that when Mexico City was, so one part it's not a rumor, one part is a rumor. We know that the Spanish conquistadors who were having, had Christianity as their foundational control mechanism for the mind, they came over and immediately started to destroy things to then install churches. And I don't know how they deduce this, but the locals have constructed this very elaborate model of one of their temples where they claim, and again, this is just a model in a room. Without seeing any evidence of this personally, I find it hard to believe this could even be made. It's a fairly gigantic temple, built sort of pyramid-y, but sort of plateau pyramid-y like they do. And then they built an enclosure over that, and one over that, and one over that, with air gaps between the walls, such as you could walk around. I mean, we're talking about even the roof blocks, not portraying any sort of mechanism to hold up the roof with, giant basalt or volcanic rock. So that may actually be wishful thinking in some regards there. But if that was true, it would have been right next to the Great Pyramids of Egypt. Deprecated only a little bit because it would be several tens of thousands of years after the pyramids. So we have to give the pyramids the OG badge of honor of being way ahead of the rest of civilization. Now, what's interesting about the Americas in general is that when we came to America from Europe, if that's you, we didn't find the wheel anywhere, which is really odd. Sophisticated societies building things with no wheels. The Northern Americans were known as Ashland. This may be a romanticized story, but they were trying to say that the Northern Americas were Ashland. It was derived from the possible inhabitants from Atlantis who fled after potentially a flood kicked them off their land, right? But there's a place called Tuslan where they have these Tula warriors or Atlantean warriors, which was named by a fictional writer that may have been dreaming up things. And so you start to get some artistic impression. They're probably 1 to 2 ton stones stacked up on each other, and then they're cut into these warriors. There were rumors that the statues are holding like laser weapons and that kind of stuff. And I guess one of the locals told them, no, it's not one of those. If you pay attention to the little waist area where there's a hand, they had managed to build a crossbow with about a 14-inch arrow, and that was fairly prominent in the area, and that's what that was. But the other thing that makes it a little bit difficult in this region is that, in the Mexico region, is that earthquakes also contributed. So you have the Spanish conquistadors coming over, destroying things in the name of Christianity, and then you've got, obviously, normal environmental wear and tear, but then you have routine earthquakes also shaking things apart. And part of the part I'm skipping that I watched in that second 2/3 was that he did cover Machu Picchu again, and did reveal that within Machu Picchu, of those amazing interlocking walls, that there are tons of stones that where the walls have actually kind of pulled apart. And so the interlocking isn't working anymore. However, which would require, they were estimating, massive earthquakes in order to displace these stones because they're so gigantic. But the nice thing is that it allows us to look inside the wall to confirm that these walls are not only amazing on the outside, they're amazing all the way through. And there are parts of South America where they have reconstructed a wall with rocks that are sort of trapezoidal when you look down on top of them. I mean, the backs are a little shorter, or a little thinner, less wide than the front. And so they stack up all the fronts to look like the ancient construction of the, pre-Incas, whoever they were, but it's all fake on the backside. So they put mortar in the back and mud and sand and stuff to fake it. But there are probably one of the most amazing areas or things he revealed about this sort of Mexico area were these, what he calls out-of-place artifacts. And what that means is they have found something that is most definitely handmade, amazing. And there's one that's like all I can say is, for those of you who've seen like square bolts where the head is just square, it looks like a gigantic sort of plug with a very rectangular head on it with these kind of wave lines carved in it. Looks artistic, but that could be for a big screwdriver for all I know, right? And then this gigantic, sort of where the rivets would be. It's not rivets, but it's something else, but it looks like a gigantic plug. And it looks at least like a ton based on everything else he's estimated. And it's like a cool 3.5 feet tall. His wife's standing next to it. She's 5'4", and it's huge and it's precise again. And it's complex. It's not just like, a cut here and there. So there's a couple of those. There are some areas where inside some of the less fantastical looking things where you have sort of a reconstructed town where they've just basically dug out all the dirt. So you kind of start seeing where the walls were. It's not as emotional as, say, Machu Picchu, which has gigantic reconstruction. And we still have what the Incas did on top of the pre-Incas. There are these round sort of basins next to each other, usually come in pairs, and they're beautifully circular. And, the locals are like, these are just used for grain. And then other locals who are more sophisticated are like, no, they're used to grind grain during the day, and then they're used for astronomy at night. Now, the bummer about the claim about it being something celestial is that they didn't really explain how it worked. I'd love to get in touch with this guy and do some 3D work for him so that when he does his presentations and has a theory, we can reconstruct a methodology, because 2 little holes inside stones down below would have to take some sort of mechanism to, put a staff in there to see what the hell you're looking at. And then he has what he calls the Obsidian Artifacts. And this is obsidian glass that is found from a volcano. Okay. So it's a local resource, not a big thing there. However, we have slides of a little vase. It's probably about 4 inches tall, maybe 3 inches in diameter, and it is definitely a spun object on a lathe and it is symmetrical, and it is beautiful. It looks like something you would get from Tiffany's today. It's black glass. It's just utterly, utterly gorgeous. Beside that, on the wall with behind this glass case are these other black discs made of the same stuff. Also absolutely precise. Looks like a little CD. In fact, it looks like honestly, it looks like a tiny 45 record, except for the label would be in the middle. Imagine that size of a 45 label being knocked completely out. Tremendous. And imagine you go and you're looking at things and you're not putting two and two together because you're not a geologist, you're not an archaeologist, an anthropologist. You're looking at things going, there was a glass face there, whatever, and you're missing the whole point. You're missing the fact that we don't know how the hell they made these things. The technology to spin that thing while it's hot. Yeah, because you see people blow glass with the rods. They do it all by hand. Well, some of that stuff can look very symmetrical, but when you put up a little micron ruler up there, it's not symmetrical. But this stuff is beautiful, amazing. He also goes to this case in the same place. And this was black, but it didn't look glassy to me. Maybe it's still the obsidian glass. But imagine a very small, reel-to-reel case. So for those of you who know reel-to-reels back in the 70s, especially the kind that they would use for big recordings back in the day, once they started getting multi-track recording, you have a tape that's about 1.5 inches to 2 inches thick, right? Big fat tape. And then you have the reel-to-reel that's recording everything that's going on. So take that reel-to-reel and shrink it down to about a 4 to 5 inch diameter across, and still leave it about 1.5 inches thick. Well, there's a case of these sort of reel-to-reel things sitting in this glass case. And again, you might look at it and go, big deal. But he just happened to have a mechanical engineer with him. And he goes, dude, how would we make these today? I mean, and he's like, well, so you can look down in the case. So you see them from top down. So you see these kind of like reel-to-reel things. There's nothing in them, right? Of course. And they have a hole directly through the center. And so you're like, okay. And then he gets down and looks through them, so you can see the center part of it. And he's like, these things are perfect. This is definitely a machined object. It's definitely spun on a lathe. There's no way you can create this kind of stuff by hand. Okay. Just, something, food for thought, man. It's crazy. Also in Mexico City, you do have a gigantic statue, which I guess is basalt, and, it's two pieces. And the biggest piece, it's a big square sort of etched, looks very Mayan sort of thing. And it's gigantic, and it sort of is in the middle between, oh my God, there's a big giant stone here that is sort of monolithic or megalithic from that era, but it's a statue of a character, so that actually is art. So is it that the statue was made out of the block that was brought for a particular reason? Don't know. And the reels are in the Jalapa Museum, just for the fact there. Then he moves over to Easter Island. And Easter Island has seen a lot of action in the last 10 years, right? They're finally digging out those heads. And for those of you who don't know what Easter Island is, or you've heard it and you're like, okay, I can't remember what that is. Is that where the Easter Bunny lives? And the answer would be yes. It's 2,000 miles off the coast of Peru in the Pacific Ocean. Now, I have a Mandela effect that it was off the coast of Africa, but it's probably just my bad memory. But the Easter Island thing is, I want to break down the anatomy of this because Easter Island is a great place to do it, because this has happened to every place that I've named and that everybody ever visits. When you have an exotic location like Easter Island, again, 2,000 miles away from the nearest coast, it has stones that are made of, heads that are made of stones that are more than 12,000 miles away, When you have something like that, you're going to have a lot of television shows that want to go there and film. And they're going to have producers that may do a good job bringing folks that know what's going on there, and they may do a horrible job But when they get back in the studio and they start cutting the show, wherever they've screwed up science, because they'll do research after they filmed everything, they'll either voice it over and fix it, or they'll go with some sensationalized theory. But they're always looking for solutions, and they don't really care if they get it all wrong. You know, I have seen recently in the last 5 to 10 years, obviously the footage of them totally digging out several of these heads, which apparently all the heads face inward all the way around the island. But there's 7 of them that face out to the ocean. Didn't know that personally. I thought they all looked like they were going outward. There's all kinds of theories about Easter Island, over harvesting. They got their population out of control. They ate all the indigenous land, food from the land, killed all the animals, forgot to breed. It seems strange that they have the capability of living there, but not the brilliance to sustain it. But you know how it works. Look at today. Our generations are forgetting everything because they just keep getting dumber and dumber as they move forward, right? Hopefully there's, plenty of hope in the exceptions. But we have a pre-Polynesian group of people that run Easter Island, and then you have the Polynesians that show up, and then you have, I believe, a Dutchman that shows up in the 1700s. And there's this evolution of what's going on. What's interesting about the heads is that the heads are used to sort of measure, okay, where did the rock come from? What did the facial structure look like? Because you have Polynesians that have a very uniform look for the most part. I'm sure they can see more than we can see, but overall there's a certain look to a Polynesian person. And then until you see someone else's appearance, let's say you're Polynesian and you can't grow a beard. Well, you may not think beards exist. And then you see a bearded Dutchman show up and you're like, oh my God, what the hell's up on what's that on your face, And you won't create any sculptures to account for the bridge of the nose being European, facial hair, that kind of stuff. So these heads are actually way more interesting than they first appear. I would say, artistically speaking, they are the most primitive of any recognized sculpture on planet Earth. They're very, very, basic. I don't see anything terribly ornate with any of the heads that would indicate mastery technology. I think that you do have stones that are from very far away. And you could be just simply dealing with a situation where the stones are brought there with the anticipation to build something, and they're not used for that. And eventually they're carved into these faces. Who knows, right? Now, the other thing that's interesting is a lot of the basalt heads that are built, that are carved there, aren't from far away. The interesting thing is they're underwater, 50 to 300 feet. And so the idea that anyone was able to labor a quarry under ocean water is pretty hard to believe. And so you have this theory that the oceans were potentially 360 feet lower than they are today, thus allowing Atlantis to exist. Thus, when it fills up for some reason, you lose previous locations. And this would explain a lot of the stuff that Graham Hancock has uncovered off the coast of Japan. There are cities underwater. So this most definitely was the case, that land was a lot more exposed. Now, the other thing that he talks about, which is utterly phenomenal, and it's something that with the, I don't know how many, the tens of thousands of pages I've read about cosmology in my research since the early 80s as a kid, you're never told that in a perfect solar system, and I don't even know if this is exactly true, but it sort of makes sense. Let's say you had this solar system that we live in today form naturally without any interruptions from the outside part of the galaxy or the universe or whatever. And I know a bunch of you are going to be typing in 2 seconds, there is no space. Hey, dude, I did that episode first on the internet, period. Let's just say it exists, okay? The Earth is tilted around 23 degrees. Well, here's what's fascinating. In the second 5 hours, he shows you structures that if the world hadn't tilted 23 degrees, these structures would perfectly predict summer equinox, winter equinox, where the sun's going to be, blah, blah, blah. And it seems to be off 23 degrees, as if in a perfect universe, spun up however this thing occurs, Earth was straight up and down. And these structures were built, aligning with the sun, the moon, and the stars, and then something happens and boom, it turns around. And this is where we get into the initial theory. We're going to loop back onto the pyramids before this is over. So Plato, we all know, if you've studied Atlantis to any degree, we know that Plato wrote about Atlantis, and these were rumors that he had heard that were potentially thousands of years old, potentially 10,000 years before he was born. And just oral history moving down talks about this. But we have this weird situation that we know through bones, especially from carcasses in Siberia, that megafauna like saber-toothed tigers, woolly mammoths, those kind of things disappeared very quickly, yet their population were in the millions. The one thing that's very interesting is that I didn't put this together till recently, is that the Mayans are revered for the fact that their written language, their symbolic language, is some of the most ornate in the world, if not the most ornate scripting in the planet. But they seem to have elephants all throughout their symbolism, their icons, their language. But there's no elephants in the Americas. And so I heard that first, and this is where you'll have two pieces of information and your brain takes a long time to go, but wait, and it kind of connects them together, right? And some of you already know this. So you're like, oh yeah, that's really weird. When did that happen? Okay. Well, you go to Los Angeles tar pits. Los Angeles tar pits are all about the woolly mammoths that are down at the bottom, and they're found all over the place, right? And this is where you get a lot of like dinosaur sort of theory being confirmed, but you're really finding a creature that's only 12,000 years old. Still an amazing situation, but they're not dinosaurs, okay? But in Siberia, they have thousands of megafauna that have been caught, especially woolly mammoths, with undigested food in their mouth and in their bellies, as if they were flash frozen. Now, what they typically will theorize is that they have fallen down inside a crevice, or as Tenacious D calls it, the crevasse, and they freeze. Except that in my observation of these examinations, you don't have broken femurs and broken bones and things with it, which would be a result of some sort of, big fall. But maybe it's a little fall, who knows? You see it all the time where elephants get their self stuck in pits and things like that. But there was a book written in the 1950s called Cataclysm. And it theorized that 9500 BC, which, add the 2000 we've already lived, you're getting right close to his 12,000 BC theory, that some sort of comet or something entered our solar system. For those of you Planet X people, get your bong out and start smoking. But here comes the comet. It comes through, and it is so gigantic and so violent that it actually yanks all the planets and weird axes, and they attribute the asteroid belt between Mars and Jupiter to this, and the asteroid belt between Mars and Jupiter, which, we have to take NASA's word for it existing seriously, because there's no way to really see it easily. It's such a massive ring. It is the orbit between Mars and Jupiter. It's massive, and to deposit that much matter in a ring, it's all combined, that ring should be as big as the sun and just be a big rock. It'd be some huge thing, so it's a grain of salt on that one. But then one of the contributors to the Cataclysm book came out with another book, which was Cataclysm Phobia or something like that. And she took it to the next level, saying that because of this thing that occurred, and they almost write it, like they've got some secret book of knowledge or something like that. But because of the world turning, where you have essentially, cold goes to hot, hot goes to cold, things are getting flash frozen, just like, we've had this happen in the Midwest in the last 10 years. They're kind of exercising their HARP capabilities or whatever they're doing. Where cattle just freezes standing up. But the woman started the idea that after 12,000 or 10,000 BC, that we had to crawl into caves to survive because of the vegetation being so destroyed by this cataclysm. Now, the only thing I could possibly imagine would be you would have to have fairly super unaffected areas of the world for anyone to survive at all. And Petra is actually interesting because it's down in that, ravine between the rocks. Maybe that's a natural way to survive things. Plus it's fairly equatorial. So not a problem, right? But the idea that you've got snow cover outside for a particular tribe that has never experienced snow before, and they're somehow finding, vegetation growing underneath that they can sustain their bodies with. And, I'd have to read the book to figure out kind of what she was thinking with that. But her whole theory is that after about 6,000 years passes, or around 6,000 BC, you have the rise of civilization, because it's a renaissance instead of being an initial rise of civilization. There's this theory that's been, heavily deprecated now, that we came out of a single female in the Africas, like some prehistoric Lucy. And it simply could be that was one of the most lush locations on the planet, such that we were able to survive the cataclysm. Now, there's another book, Earth Under Fire. I'm not even going to try to say this guy. It's Dr. Paul something or other. His theory is, I don't know how this works. Again, it's sort of leaning on a bedrock of, it would always be like writing a book about Atlantis, but your key witness is a person channeling an alien from, outer space or something like that. But this theory was that, one, when I say this, and I want to laugh out loud, because everything I'm about to say is completely absurd. Absolutely everything I'm about to say. Not a part of it, every bit of it, right? That our galaxy doesn't have a black hole in the center, insert laugh track. It has a pulsar in the middle, insert second laugh track. And that this pulsar routinely on some epoch, blows out this gigantic wave of plasma just all throughout the galaxy in all directions. And then obviously a little spibble of it hits Earth. And it would have to be a microscopic spibble from the center of the galaxy. Okay. One, it would take a tremendous amount of time to get here. Isn't the galaxy... The number always changes, so I will tell you what I was told in high school, that if you were to travel across the diameter of our galaxy, it would take something on the order of like 210 million light years. Okay. So this old BS about it being some cycle and it all happens automatically, it would have to go with an electrical universe model, which whatever. Then the pulsar disappears. Then the black hole disappears. Gravity is a push on a pull, which is the truth. But they called it the galactic superwave. You have to have a really cool name for your car. Grease lightning, baby. So then Foerster put a book on top of that where he really endorses that. Now, I think what's interesting is attaching yourself to crazy to get your book off the ground is unnecessary. Simply write about what you observe. He has proven beyond the shadow of a doubt that a very high temperature, 2000 Celsius plus wave of heat has destroyed things around the world. Petra's got burn marks. Around the Machu Picchu area of Peru, they have some burn marks, but Egypt is just cratered with gigantic waves of really super hot something or other. But the other thing is that they don't realize or recognize that the Earth has a plasma core. So Brien Foerster is sitting there believing probably the nickel iron theory, which makes no sense because it loses magnetism 6,500 degrees Fahrenheit, and therefore the poles don't make any sense. But if you just fill it with what the sun's full of, which is what the moon's full of, oh my gosh, you have an ecosystem, and it's called electrical universe theory, and it's what the pyramids are based off of. It's what Tesla's thing was based off of, and probably the dude from Coral Castle. Okay, I won't go into it again. But they're playing with electricity. They're building pyramids all over the place. They're, who knows what was going on with the previous construction in the Americas. But just in Egypt, okay, they're starting to siphon out of the ground a potentially limitless supply of plasma, because as we use our plasma, the sun is injecting it on a subatomic level, on an ethereal level. And so we're never going to run out. It's an ecosystem, right? If you had 10 people in the room and you all sat in a big circle and you brought so much change with you, and maybe even paper money, and you just keep buying from each other and going back and forth and go, does the money ever disappear? No, it never disappears. You can't hide energy in the universe. And so this is the theory. But because man runs out of resources constantly, we tend to impose those theories on the physics of the universe, and there's no such thing. So let's say they're constantly building. There are hundreds and hundreds of bent pyramids, regular pyramids. There are pyramids bigger, I believe, than the Giza Plateau. Pyramids like the Great Pyramid, but they're deconstructed. What Foerster gets into is the idea that these pyramids overloaded. They simply brought too much electricity up. And you know how siphons work? Now, when you're siphoning water from a tank using a hose and you're pulling on it and you're blowing water out, then it's limited by literally the diameter of the hose. That's your maximum. You can put more pressure in it and get more out, more amperage. But when you don't have a hose, when you have an open aperture to the center of the earth, right? How big is the pyramid compared to the center of the earth, which is probably a figure 8 surrounded by a Van Allen belt in the internals. This is the natural way the electricity flows. You're going to get a lot more than you can handle. So what I would love Foerster to do is to document the direction of the blast and then map all the pyramids everywhere on planet Earth and see if in one particular day all these things networked. One particular day, it just said, okay, you want it? I'm going to give it to you. Kaboom. And you get 1 trillion volts of electricity out of the ground, which then melts all the pyramids. He was saying that, I don't mean all the way to the ground, but the encapsulating limestone just blows off. Could technically evaporate. It's strong to carve, but it is not strong for electricity to liquefy. Now, you would think you would see some very intense evidence of such things. Maybe erosion helps, don't know. But he starts going back to Egypt, and it was some pretty interesting stuff because, for me personally, it's just seeing a bunch of stuff from the Valley of the Kings and the Valley of the Queens and never thinking about more than what I'm being taught. His assertion, which I think has a lot of good rationale, is that this stuff was discovered by the dynastic period individuals. And he said that, look at a lot of the paintwork in the Valley of the Kings and the Valley of the Queens. A lot of it's just a paint that's been applied to a flat wall and then drawn on that are hieroglyphs. And that looks like someone found it, didn't want to disturb it because it was made by the gods, but we're going to paint on it and we're going to turn these into tombs. Somebody goes, hey man, I would like to be buried here, So, Walt Disney, for instance, died without knowing he was going to die in 1965, but he was a Carlsbad Canyon fan, which is why the Pirates of the Caribbean are modeled after the Carlsbad Canyon. But now imagine he knew he was going to die, and he goes, look, can I just be buried in the Carlsbad Canyon? And they go, yeah, sure, whatever. To kind of hide your body and stuff, but okay, we'll work it out, whatever. So if you knew these places exist, you could get yourself buried there. But he suggests this theory by showing you that there's definitely sort of a straight line of construction from the Valley of the Queens, and there's another one on the other side of this mountain from the Valley of the Kings coming down towards the Valley of the Queens. And when he did this little aerial shot, it's not terribly great, but he goes, look, it looks like these two things might be connected with underground caverns. And because he's been in the caverns underneath the Giza plateau, he's like, trust me, man. He goes, I only went 4 stories down, but it was almost like 300 feet. Because every story is like 60 feet. It's not like us building a 12-foot to 14-foot story on a building in our time frame. But he was told that he only got to the 4th level underneath the plateau, and the locals said, yeah, there's 10 more down below. Amazing, right? He also went back into the Sphinx. Now, I covered most of this in the first episode about the water erosion, about the possibility of chambers inside of the Sphinx. He did show a new slide where he walked around the back of the Sphinx with his guide, and they took this grill off the back of the Sphinx itself, and there was a pit, black as night, where you could climb down in it. You'd have to be a pretty small guy to do it, but there's something there. But he shows you that, in front of the paws of the Sphinx, you have a wood deck now, all of a sudden. And he said, that's because he said, this is me talking on his behalf. He said that they were told that by the local guides that is actually not a plank to protect anything. It's because they're now excavating underneath the paws and they don't want anyone to know. So they put that on top to hide what they're doing. Interesting. Now he also shows, some of the abandoned obelisks, and I guess one of the biggest abandoned structures on this planet is a 1,200-ton obelisk, which several of you have most likely seen in different specials, but I don't know that I ever heard that it was 1,200 tons. I mean, that is it's just massive, man. And it doesn't appear to have any structural issues. A lot of them will break, but some of them are absolutely perfect. You just don't know why they were abandoned. Sometimes they'll dig down and find out that the limestone that they're going to be using to create this has a horizontal crack across the entire structure from some sedimentary issues. They find out that this thing will never hold together because it's cracked. It's just a basic, maybe even a waterway that was underneath there. But I will show you one slide that he just glossed over, man. Unbelievable. It's hard to describe. It has a pyramid on top. It's lying on its side. It's a big rock. It looks to me to be somewhere in the neighborhood of like 10 to 12 foot rectangle. Okay. But inside the rectangle, just like an old man who does the carving inside a block of wood to create a chamber inside, like a sphere or something. It's got sort of like a pagoda, like a little room inside there, but on top is the most precise freaking pyramid ever. It just looks out of place. It looks like it was built yesterday, So I don't know why he just glossed over that. So this particular 7-hour thing, the summation of it is actually twofold. So you have this profound understanding that all over the world, you've got gigantic stone construction, which blows the mind, with sort of more recent stuff built on top. In every case, nobody knows who the previous people were because it is so far back that everything's been erased by an event. Now, for my money, he's onto something with the burn marks, which appear to be in a lot of places. Now, we also know that kelming is a process by which you can trap fire and get super duper hot things to occur. But it doesn't mean that a cataclysmic superwave came from space and burned everything up. But the burn marks I saw in South America look like it could have been some experiment in cooking things. For those of you that, well, I'll just give an example. I read an article, 25 years ago, 30 years ago, talking about why pizza sometimes leaves your mouth like Captain Crunch, all stringy. And they said that you need to understand that in the layers of crust on a pizza, it can store like 400-degree temperatures for a very long time because of the way it's layered. So that's kiln technology. Anyone you've dealt with blowing glass, firing pottery, that with, just some wood and a shaped stove without electricity or anything else, you can get to thousands of degrees. So it's not like they couldn't have lumped rocks together, not realizing what they were doing, and then they score some things. But that doesn't explain the stuff in Egypt where these statues appear to be blasted apart, knocked down. Rock will explode sometimes because it has air bubbles in it that then boil and then pop. There's that very special rock that, at least in America, it's white and it's very porous. It's very Swiss cheesy. And when you're in Boy Scouts or Cub Scouts, they'll teach you never use that rock to build a fire because it explodes. Plenty of you have heard logs explode in the fire. So, who knows exactly how all this stuff happens. But we have a gigantic part of our history that is simply missing. And what's interesting is we don't have anything beyond that we've discovered. So what's interesting about that is we have this laser focused question that we can ask globally. Who built these structures? Who built them in the Americas? Who built them on Africa? Turkey has some amazing things as well. There is Stonehenge. Stonehenge for me has been so manipulated, so changed. Only a British person is hanging on to any theory of what the hell that is. But it was there in a different location in the late 1800s. And then in 1954, they started to move the stones and reconstruct them. It doesn't mean it wasn't what it was. But then you have these creepy druids show up and go, no, it's definitely ours. It's like, oh, it's definitely yours, huh? Oh, totally. It's all druid, devil worshipping crap. Okay, and don't lecture me. I'm making a joke. But how come when it was a pile of rock over there, the druids never showed up? And why haven't you built a bunch of these things since then? You don't have to build them out of gigantic stones, but where are all your druid churches that look exactly like Stonehenge before Stonehenge existed? 1954 is pretty late in the game, man. The Day of the Earth is still had already been made. Buck Rogers had already been made. So I just don't have any real interest in Stonehenge at all. It'd be like, the pyramids were moved from the Giza Plateau to Havasu, California. And it's like, oh, I want you to worship them here because this is where they were built. And it's like, but we have something here and it's just getting better and better and better. We're at the infancy of the whole game, which is interesting. Any one of you hearing my voice that has the ability to travel in this world, at least after the American election, when the world will suddenly lose COVID, you will be able to, if you would like, to get involved with these programs, to just go there on your own, just get a ticket and go. There's nothing I'm seeing from Brien Foerster that looks impossible. He's buying plane tickets and he's going places. Now, it did dawn on me that he said that he had been to Machu Picchu 68 times. And I didn't really think about that until I thought, wait a minute, how old are you? Most people would only go once a year. If you went twice a year, then it would take you 34 years to go there. He's not that old. I mean, he's definitely in his 50s, but he must be counting every day that he goes to bed and gets up and goes back to the location. So I guess that's it. I'll just say this much for my credibility. If I bought a 2-day pass to Disneyland, I would not tell you that I went there 2 times this week. I would say I went there 1 time for 2 days, that kind of thing. The interesting thing about these locations is that you have a lot of very caring archaeologists today that aren't linked to a museum. They're not linked to a government agenda, a historical agenda. That all they want to do is just dig down very gently and think about all the digital photography we have. Think about all the subterranean sonic indicators we can have. We can paint a picture of what's in the ground before we dig anything out and just go, okay, there's that wild statue. We can see it right there. It's got a face on it. Doesn't appear to be anything in the ground at all. Not a hair that's coming up on this radar for 3 feet. So we can fairly aggressively go down at least 2.5 feet when we want to slow down, and we could dig this stuff out and try to find out who the hell we are. But it's ganked by local agencies, government agencies. I mean, I guarantee you the Arabs will never want to admit they found the pyramids, as if somehow it's going to divorce them from being from the area or being a part of the dynastic era of Egypt. It doesn't. It just says, look, you found some pretty cool stuff here. For some reason, these people got wiped out. Let's all work together. So, yeah. So if you're interested, I want to seed your brain that you could buy a ticket. You want to go call someone like a Foerster to get all the good, this is where you can go. This is where you can't go. Put this on. Don't eat that. You're going to have to wear this over your face or whatever it is. Don't talk to those guys. Talk to those guys. Get all that put together. Bring your money, whatever. And you could contribute whatever expertise you have. It's all about connections. It's about spending time there, taking photographs, looking around, trying to make things, see if things can connect. The amount of evidence that high technology was used is it's just conclusive. Absolutely conclusive. There's something there. And let me just close with this idea. What if, and there's a couple ways I could pitch this movie story at you, but let's say that you saw something super intelligent in the sky. It's dancing in front of you and it appears to have talked to you. It seems like like I'm on Huntington Beach right now. I'm staring in the direction that the beach is at. 3.5 miles away, it's ocean. Okay. So say I see something while I'm filming a show and I'm like, okay, move right, move left. And it's doing everything that I say. And then it hauls ass out of my screen. Then all of a sudden, Cairo calls the press and says, we just had an unidentified flying object embed itself into the ground at Giza. And, it seems to have buried itself down. So we're going to start, trying to dig down and figure out what this thing is. No more energies coming out of the hole. Now, I think I've had this personal experience with the object. I talked to it. It did what I asked it to do. It answered questions or whatever, right? The Stephen Greer thing. Am I going to sit here in Huntington Beach? Or am I going to Cairo? Because I had an experience. Maybe I'm the keymaster to getting this thing to come out of the ground. So I got to make phone calls. I got to figure out who's going to believe me. If I had this camera, maybe I flip it around and I get proof, right? It's going to be filming the ground. Won't really do me any good, but you hear what I'm saying? So if any of this appeals to you on that sort of subatomic spiritual level, then maybe there's something out there for you. Anyway, I hope you dug that. I've totally enjoyed this. I want to go way further than this. So we'll perhaps just continue this particular theme as time goes on and then see if we can come up with some different epiphanies. But if you haven't been to deepthoughtsradio.com, please go. It's all spruced up. It has two video, 2 audio, 4 or 5 social media nowadays with Parler. It has an all-new remastered Season 1. There's a couple ways to donate. Thank you for every single human being that parts with a penny of your hard-earned money. The stores definitely got a lot more traffic recently. So definitely get your Season 5 stuff. I'm going to be creating sort of a series of shirts that are going to sort of be retro shirts for those of you who've been here a really long time. So you'll be able to get a Season 1 shirt, 2 shirt, 3 shirt, or just some big OG shirt. And then we'll go on with Season 6. Okay. And just as a little footnote here, because I'm getting a lot of people asking me about the Tesla thing, or do you need help? What's wrong? You know, and I'm like, okay, here's how the Tesla's episodes are breaking down. Didn't know this when I first started. I was given a lot of coveted diagrams with his handwriting, not the originals, but scans that are just unbelievable, right? It's like literally him writing how to build towers and things. So there's that portion of it, which is fairly understandable. You know, it's actually, he kept things very simple. He makes it easy for people like us to understand. He's doing all the hard work. Then there's his life story, which is sort of his childhood and where he was and all that kind of stuff, which he has an autobiography up to 1919. And then you have to take it with different sources up the other, you know, remaining years until he passed away, I think, at 43. And then you have the just metric tons of patents that this guy came up with. And what I have discovered is that his patents are going in a vector. He is going in a direction. They all seem to butt up against each other. I haven't reached the end of it because I'm dissecting, you know, various patents. I'm not going to be overwhelming folks with electronics. Electrical theory will be basically there to sort of make it all make sense. We've definitely got to go through his Tesla tower. We've got to go through the invention of the Tesla coil, what he, you know, was intending on that. So it's just a tremendous amount of stuff. Tesla created the modern universe, and there's no way that we can just do a little, yeah, he's a pretty neat guy. You know, he counted his, count how many times he walked around a building before he would eat. See you later. Can't be like that. We got to give him some serious juice. So that's why it's taking a little bit longer, but that's why I'm satiating you in the meantime, hopefully. Anyway, thank you for your patience. Love you guys to death. Take care of yourself and someone else, and I'll see you in the next Deep Thoughts. Over now.